So I was given this air compressor by a friend, and he said there was something wrong with it. It sat in the garage for a while, and I really didn't touch it until just now. I plugged it in, and it sounded really good until it got to 60 psi, and it popped. What happened was this line actually just pulled right out of that fitting. So I'm guessing that's the problem. So we'll see what we can do about that. That's how we were using it. This orange tape was holding that line into the fitting. So it was still working. Let's pull all these fittings out and try to clean them. So this is pretty grody, but that shouldn't matter too much. Okay, I see. There's supposed to be a ring beneath that seal holding it on. Yeah, I see. So the locking ring in this thing dissolved or rusted. That's why that line was not being held in. So the way this clamps on is it has this little like toothed washer basically, and that slides on and does not slide back off easily, at least. So one side of this tube was still locked into the fitting because it had this washer on it. The other side of the tubing was coming out of the fitting because this washer had rusted into dust. So there was nothing locking it in, but it did seal because of the O-ring up to a certain pressure. So I looked around for a bit and I couldn't easily find one of these lock washers. So what I decided to do is to take the lock washer from this fitting and replace the rusted out one in this fitting to use it to lock this end together. So that sorts out the connector for this end, but then what about this end? Instead of trying to get a new slip fitting, why not just use a compression fitting? These are commonly used for copper pipes in houses and stuff, but people do use these for air compressors. It seems like they're not used too much, maybe because a hard mount like this might be subject to vibration, but since the other mount still uses that slip fitting with the O-ring to mitigate some of the vibration, I don't know, it's probably okay. I couldn't really find anybody saying they had this setup and it failed, just that it might. So I think it's okay. The way these work is there's a little collet in there that's a separate piece from the nut, and that slides over with the collet inside, and then it tightens together, and that collet crushes against the copper and holds everything very tightly together. On this adapter, this end is a 3/8" NPT, which fits into the outlet of the compressor pump. Before reinstalling, I'm just going to take some sandpaper and lightly smooth this end off so that it has the best chance to seal and stay in there. And for this end, I'm going to take a cutter and cut the very end of this off and then sand this side smooth so that we have a nice surface for that collet to seal to. I'm not concerned about making it shorter because that compression adapter is a little bit taller, and also we can always, bend this a little bit if we have to. Okay, that's a fairly smooth surface. It should seal fairly well. And this is for all those people who yelled at me for using these steel wire brushes to clean the iron cylinder head sealing surfaces. These brushes are reasonably soft, and if there's no significant scarring to this copper, there's no way they would hurt the iron. These pipe cutters are very nifty tools, and they make very straight cuts. This is a little closer to the edge than you'd normally really want to cut with one of these, but this doesn't have to be super straight, so I think we'll be fine. I can deburr this fairly aggressively because we're not making a flare on this to seal like we would with a brake line or something. I'm actually gonna take some sandpaper and try to smooth this out even more. Okay, I think this is in pretty good shape and we're ready to install it. And since I probably bent it getting it out, I'm gonna take this tooth washer and just clamp it in the vise. Make sure to get all the teeth in there. And that should basically reset it. I'm gonna try to clean up as much of the rust as possible. So on this side, the first thing in is that toothed ring, and then a flat washer, and then the O-ring with some oil on it, and then another flat washer, and then the circlip. Okay, so that should be all together. So we can go ahead and thread this in to the tank. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down to 25 foot-pounds. And then I'll thread in the pipe thread half of the adapter. And it's in aluminum, so we'll tighten that down to 20 foot-pounds. So with everything clean and a drop of oil on both ends and inside of the compression nut, let's try to get this back on here. I can pull on it pretty hard. It doesn't seem to want to come out, so we might be good. Then we'll make sure the copper pipe is inserted as far as it'll go, and then tighten the compression nut. I'll press on it to make sure the copper pipe stays all the way in that fitting. So we just tighten up this nut. So it's compressing that brass cullet, that ferrule, around the copper tubing to form a very tight seal. Let's leave it right there. Feels pretty good. Now we have to reattach the smaller airline, and in order to do so, I need to turn the fitting a little bit farther so that the port lines up better. And I'll just get that one nice and snug, and we'll give this copper piping one last check to make sure it doesn't seem like it wants to come out. Nope, feels pretty tight. Okay, let's plug it in and see what happens. Okay, so it's leaking out that port right there. I believe that is the line for the sensor to check with pressure so it knows when to shut off. It's hooked into the compressor side, which is supposed to relieve the air because it doesn't really need to store pressure in there. It only stores pressure in the tank. The problem is it's obviously connected to the tank, which means that check valve has failed. This brass piece is a one-way check valve, so it lets air into the tank but not back out. It is obviously only doing one of those things. It looked really rough and gross, so it's not too surprising that it's not working at the moment. So now we know this definitely seems to function properly, except for the check valve not sealing the tanks. So we'll pull the check valve back out and do something I should have done when I first saw the condition of it. Replace it. And then I'll get the snap ring out of the check valve to remove the copper pipe. Took quite a bit of force, but I pulled it out of the toothed ring, I guess. And we can remove all the washers. Now that it's in front of me and I'm looking for it, it's obvious that this thing is not sealing properly and is sticking in the bore. So of course the valve isn't going to work terribly well for sealing that off. I really should have just changed this out the first time. I was being too cheap, which has never happened before. So now I've done what I should have in the first place and got a new check valve. You can see this one actually springs back and does not get stuck, unlike the old one. The only consideration is that this is threaded up top instead of having this built-in push fitting. So I'm going to take the other push fitting we had, thread it into here, and cut the pipe a little shorter to compensate for that added height. And then we get to put it back together again. And I'm going to take the good pieces and rebuild this small fitting, the 3/8 inch one, so that we can install that on the new check valve. First up is the tooth washer, which I flattened out in the vise again. Flat washer, and then the O-ring, another flat washer, and then reinstall the lock ring. this fitting is reassembled. I'll tighten this to 20 foot-pounds. So there's our new check valve with the push lock fitting. Since there's not much length left here, I'm just going to cut a little bit off the end, and then we'll just have to bend things a little bit to make everything fit on. And we'll clean that end up and then get ready to put everything back together. Okay, the line's connected and the check valve is installed. Let's give this another go. Okay, it's holding 125 psi. Let's wiggle all the lines. Try to make sure it's gonna stay that way. Yeah, that seems to be the regulator. I'll have to see how this regulator does long term, but that's not too big a deal if it is an issue. It seems like this is holding air, and it builds it up way faster and even quieter than the old air compressor. I'm very happy with that.